Clay lives in West Seattle and has devoted his adult life to writing journalism, books, and publications. He worked 15 years as an editor, reporter, and photographer for 4 Pacific Northwest newspapers, including the Oregon Daily Emerald, the independent student newspaper at the University of Oregon. See, you could have edited this out if you wanted to. But I knew we needed time, so I'm going to go through all of it, yes. He spent a couple years as a journalism teacher and 13 years as a curriculum writer and publications editor for Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center. Clay has written a number of books, one about musician Steve Goodman, and he wrote Every Time a Bell Rings, about Carolyn Grimes. He was editor of West Seattle's huge historical West Side Story and did research for a biography of the namesake of baseball's Hutch Award, Fred Hutchinson, who was named Seattle's Athlete of the 20th Century. Clay's been involved as a volunteer for the Southwest Seattle Historical Society for many years and served as our executive director until fairly recently, leading the community in many restorative projects, including the billboards around town, the preservation of the Admiral Movie Theater, and he initiated the project of preserving some of our historic buildings. He's married to a former journalist, Meg Eals. His daughter and granddaughter live in Philadelphia. And I already told you how I first met Clay. So what did I add? He's been honored in his leadership by the community. He's respected and adored by many of us who have worked with him. He's truly an all-around nice guy. Music enthusiast, baseball player, and a great chocolate chip cookie maker. Will you guys help me welcome Clay Eals?
Thank you, Dorothy.
I asked Clay when we were coming in whether he brought any donuts. Now I'm going to ask him whether he brought any chocolate chip cookies.
All right, Clay, keep it short.
Thank you. This is great to see a full house, and some of you probably think you came to the wrong show with that introduction. The stars are over here, Jean and Paul. I'm certainly a part of this project, but they're the luminaries. I want you to think for just one moment. Think of somebody in your life you've known for 30, 40 years for a moment, and then think of a defining element of that relationship. And to me, when I think of Paul and Jean, I think of the word generosity. When I first met Paul, I was editor of the West Seattle Herald. We were putting together a special section called Bridging the Gap for the 1984 opening of the West Seattle Bridge. I still call it the New Bridge. Anyway, I went over to Paul's house back in 1983, had not met him before, had certainly seen his column and his books. You're going to hear about that in a little bit. We were down in your basement, and
few people get down there.
He pulls out a drawer, and he pulls out a 2 1/4 by 2 1/4 negative of the City of Seattle ferry, and it had a little rip in the negative, and it's from about 1890. And this was the first ferry on Puget Sound, and it went from downtown to West Seattle and back. It cost 5 cents. That's a whole story in itself. But the point of this is he holds the negative and he gives it, he says, "Here, take this." He didn't know me from anybody. He said, "Just get it back when you're ready." And very few people are like that. And you get your chance in a minute, sir. And when I met Jean later, Jean has been taking the now photos for Paul for the past dozen years or so, and we became fast friends then as well. And if any of you know of the group hugs that have been taken here in West Seattle over the years, the man responsible for the fine photography, the beautiful images, I mean, they are really pieces of art, is Jean Sherrard. The very first one was almost 10 years ago. It was summer of 2010 in front of the Alki Homestead restaurant. This was with 250 people there, and the posters you may have seen say, "This place matters." And it matters so much that we were able to, as an organization, facilitate the purchase and the renovation by Dennis Schilling of this place, so that next month you'll be able to go back to the Alki Homestead It's beautifully restored, and it takes a village to put this kind of stuff together, and Jean Sherrard is a huge part of that. So you're going to learn much more about them from them through this presentation, but I just want you to know these are good guys, and please give them your biggest applause.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Clay, for your too generous and excessive introduction. Paul deserves it all, though. This book is essentially a celebration of his 37 years of work since 1982. So we are now beginning, I guess this is beginning the 37th year, isn't it? Or we finished 37. This is the start of the 38th. So
You don't got long left.
he's been around for a while. Anyway, I'm going to start off this event, and Paul didn't want me to do it this way, but I'm going to do it anyway. We're going to start off with a short bio of Mr. Dorpat. Let's see.
This is Your Life, a program for all Americans. Now here he is, Mr. This Is Your Life himself, Ralph Edwards.
Okay. So Paul Dorpat, this is your life. And here's Paul in a photo that we call Saving the World for Democracy. This is Second World War. He's in North Dakota. And he's got his gun and he's got his flag. And what is that on your head? Is that a pith helmet?
I'll have to turn and look at it.
Well, you can see it on my computer.
Is this your computer?
Yeah.
I think that's an actual helmet for kids that, celebrates the work being done by people in the military.
And you were, so this is probably 43?
We camouflage it. Well, let's see, I was born in 38. How old am I there?
I think 4 or 5.
Okay, so yeah, it's before we moved to Seattle at this began. And that was in 6, somewhere during the war.
Well, let's go back a little further and we'll look at Paul with his brothers. Paul is the baby of these 4 brothers, and so he's sitting on his eldest brother's lap. That's Ted, who was a psychiatrist, psychologist at the University of Washington. And there are his 2 middle brothers. And watch now as which one is the handsome one, Paul?
Well, I think there's no doubt about that. Let's vote on it now, okay? Ready to vote? Look at these. Look at the 4 of them. Tell me which is the most handsome one. Is it the one in the upper left, the shorter one? The one in the lower right, my oldest brother? The one in the upper right, the tall one here anyway? Or me? Which is it?
Oh, yeah.
No, I didn't want, no, I don't want that. Don't, you mistake me. I'm taking my name off of this contest list because it's too easy for you.
Upper right.
Upper right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. He's the handsome one.
Let's look at him 15 years ago.
There he is, second from the what?
Of course, he has the glass of wine.
Second from the left, that's Norm. But all these guys are kaput now. I'm the only one surviving of the family. And I don't got long, I don't think. I'm hobbling.
Well, here's Paul with his dad, the Reverend Theodore, and his mom, Cherry. And
People, good folks.
and of course they were Lutherans, of course. Right?
Yeah, Lutherans, yeah. Dad was an incredibly eloquent and effective speaker. And he didn't have much to say, but he was very effective as a speaker. The rhetorical side of it all.
Well, we're going to jump forward now from
There, that's the end of it.
childhood to the Helix. And the Helix led to a number of interesting things, but shocking to jump to the Helix. This is from December 1967, and I remember as a kid taking posters from the back pages of the Helix and putting them on my bedroom wall just to offend my mother. So,
Mom was not easily offended.
well, you didn't know her when I was 10. And the Helix led to things like the Sky River Rock
You
Festival.
guys know what the Helix was, any of you?
No.
So it was a tabloid newspaper during the hippie times, you know, the counter-revolution times. So I was part of a group that put that out every week. That was a wonderful experience. Okay, go ahead.
You talk to kids my age, and a lot of them were delivering the Helix on the street. So they'd be like, today you have real change. Teenagers would sell the Helix on the streets of Seattle, particularly around the U
I
District.
think the editor would too.
The editor would too.
Make money.
Well, the Helix was the first underground newspaper in Seattle, I think, wasn't it?
Oh, definitely.
And it led to, in short order, the Sky River Rock Festival, which was kind of extraordinary. If you see some of the names here, from Santana to Muddy Waters to the Youngbloods to Richard Pryor, San Francisco Mime Troupe, and Paul was the producer. So
I don't remember how I ever did that. It's tough. Anyway, any more questions?
What year?
Well, you're standing
You're
here.
all gonna buy a book now, aren't you?
Paul's standing here at the Sky River Rock Festival, which is up Highway 2 now, on a farm, outdoors, held for 3 days. And he's standing with Tom Robbins, who showed up for the
You know who
festivities.
Tom Robbins is, any of you?
Oh, yeah.
Tom Robbins.
Raise your hand if you know who Tom Robbins is. Well, it's interesting. There's a lot of, you're an erudite group.
Come on. Well, tell us.
Well, it was also called Mud River, because
Never heard it called that.
for most of those days, which wasn't this end of summer, Labor Day weekend?
Yeah.
For most of the days of the Sky River Festival, it rained, and for a couple hours the sun came out, and people bathed in mud. And in our 28 shows now, over the last few months, we've only had one person say, "Oh yeah, you can see me in this photo," and he claims he was up on the hill up above. He wasn't in the mud.
What year was that?
This was 68. 68.
So this is a full year before Woodstock.
That's right. We were the first big outdoor festival that was done like in a pasture. You know, it wasn't done in a prepared stage, like for instance the one down in San Francisco, which was what's the name of that one?
Fillmore.
Huh?
Altamont.
No, not Altamont. No, that was the one where people got injured. Yeah, no. Monterey. The Monterey Festival. That was done in the county fairgrounds. So that was a year earlier. That was 67.
Well, we're going to jump now to the next installment of, there were many things that happened to Paul between 1970 and 1980, but significant amongst them was this shaping moment in which he became our public historian. And but only a few months before he started the column in January of '82, he released this book of 294 glimpses of historic Seattle and sold it for a penny a glimpse. So I think you sold 60,000 copies?
No, more like 45, I think, but maybe it was 60. We had to reprint it several times. Whatever I told you last time, that'll work.
We'll check the tapes. So after that, he started the column in the Times. This is Paul standing with a dear friend and a mentor. You guys know who this is. Any guesses?
You read a book or two of his.
Murray Morgan.
Right.
His very famous book of Seattle, Skid Row, just was released, in a new edition.
Yeah, how many have read Skid Row? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of you. That's impressive.
We had to in college.
What's that?
We had to in college.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Where did you go to college?
Western.
Yeah, I was an artist in residence there in 1970, I think. great time.
We're going to jump now to another
We'll
facet.
follow that later.
You can chat later on the front steps. Another aspect of Paul's ongoing investigations, he would interview people and gather their personal histories. And this is Lucy Campbell Co, who was at this point one of the handful of witnesses to the Seattle fire. She was a few years old when the fire broke out downtown in 1889. So at this point, would she be in her mid-90s?
No, I think she's over 100. Where are we? What's our date? Aren't we 89?
Yeah, 89 to...
So, no, she had to be a little older than that. She'd be more like 104, maybe 103, 104. She was really swell. Very good sense of humor. Had wonderful donuts.
Donuts have always been a theme in Paul's. 2011, Paul and I had been working together. We put out a book together starting in about 2004. We worked on a book called Washington Now and Then, or Then and Now, and that was published in 2007. And by 2011, we had been, I think, working on the column. I'd been shooting the column for 4 years or so. We did a show at Mohai called Now and Then, and we brought our Parisian friend Bérengère over to fill the foyer with Paris Now and Then shots. So this is...
You got that foyer in there, that was nice, a little French.
And so we filled up... oh, there we go. We filled up the rest of the exhibit with Seattle and statewide subjects, and Paul also did some marvelous collections of his walks through Wallingford and time-lapse photographs of years of walking through Wallingford in the seasons. Here's Bérengère and me and Paul on his back porch, and now we're going to do a little duck and dive. We're going to wander back as the last little piece of Paul's bio. We're going to look back at our first visit to Paris together in 2005, first and only, though Paul had been to Paris when he was 16 in the mid-50s. And I might just turn this off and speak a little louder. So, but here's our little, captured on video, a little odd and wonderful moment in the life of Paul. Let's see. And I'm holding the video camera.
Oh, that's incredible. He looks very much like me, doesn't he?
He does, with the glasses, with the glasses.
Here we go. Take this video.
Okay.
Let's sit down. Okay.
Bérengère sent him back so she could take a still photo of the two of them. And at this point, I've got the camera on him, but I start to laugh, so it begins to jiggle just a little bit. But look at this guy.
You know the word doppelganger, right?
Yeah.
Turns out he Bérengère got to know him, and he's a Romanian priest. And he's also known for his interest and expertise in historic buildings in Paris, largely.
I think he just won an award for the restoration of his central Paris Romanian Orthodox Church. So he was very good.
Anyway, nice guy.
So let's get to the book, and we're going to actually, you know, I just discovered something, Paul, which I had not remembered until I reviewed it today.
Yeah.
And this photo was taken 100 years and 2 days ago.
We should have been here 2 days earlier.
We should have. But the photo is it's a welcome home celebration for the 63rd Coastal Artillery in 1919. And they had just come back from the war. It is March 12th, 1919. And they were Seattle's own, so the entire community went out and, as was their wont, filled up the streets with banners and flags and festoons. And this was Paul's very first column on January 17th, 1982. So part of my job, I interpreted it to be, in choosing 100 subjects or so, part of my job was to go back and find something significant in the reshoot. And so I went back on January 21st, 2017, and found this at about the same corner. This just was the largest march in Seattle history, and it was the Women's March just following the inauguration.
And one of the women in there, the woman in the red coat, the bottom right, is Karen, Jean's wife.
Yeah.
Who are the other women with her?
I don't know.
Mixing with strangers again.
Is it Fourth Avenue?
Yes, sorry, I should mention, it's just Westlake, looking at Westlake,
Fourth
that's
and
4th and
Pike.
Pike. Yeah.
Or what, any of you go on that march? So they even made it down from West Seattle.
Don't say it.
What am I supposed to say?
No.
He's gonna say it?
You were gonna taunt him about the viaduct,
No,
weren't you?
I'm not
Right
gonna.
there in
Oh, dang, I missed a chance.
Okay, so here's Paul's first photo that appeared in the Times, taken probably in the fall, several months before. You can see the barista standing, holding the original photo, and this was from the first column. Just incidentally, the blog that we all share, pauldorpat.com, is slowly accumulating all of these 1,800 columns that have been written over the past 37 years. And they're all going to be on the blog in original PDFs, and they should be searchable, so I think you will.
How many of you guys use the internet for searching and stuff? Well, then you know how to use it. That's great. So the reason I said that is because really our blog is considerably richer and is considerably got more substance in the articles as they appear in the paper. So you may consider that.
Here's the first.
Consider looking at that, will you? The blog. Will you look at the blog then?
Here's the very first article that we feature in the book. We do them consecutively according to the time that they were published in the paper. So the very first pages of the book featuring the column are also the very first column Paul wrote. The last column is from last summer, and that is the last column in the book. So you will see this, 100 columns stretching out over those 37
But they
years.
bump around.
They do bump
The
around.
first and last is the only direct isometric relevance.
One thing that we just found out a couple days ago is our book was delayed in China for maybe 6-7 weeks. So we had a really, really short sales season. We had 5,000 copies printed. And the Chinese printer finally got it to us and through US Customs end of November, beginning of December. So we had about 3.5 weeks of sales. And yet, to our surprise, I just found out last week that we sold all but about 600 copies. So 43.
So they're getting short supply. You're going to want to buy them. You're going to probably want to buy more than one.
So and it was up until a couple days ago, we were thinking, our distributor told us this, and we breathed a sigh of relief. Now we have to think about printing another set.
Yeah.
So
I'm looking for investors now.
here we are down on, this is, you all may have seen the second deepest snow in Seattle and know of it, which is February 2nd, 1916. That's when the dome of St. James collapsed under the weight. This is the deepest snow from 1880. And the wonderful, kind of the delicious ironies of it are in the paper the day before the snow started, on the Sunday Intelligencer. Elisha P. Ferry, our governor at the time, put out a State of the State address in which he said, the Northwest is known for its clement weather. It never snows, there's very little ice, it's always gentle, and everyone should come here and feel invited by the lovely weather. And the next day it started to snow. And it kept snowing for 8 days, and it came down about 64 inches, making our last little flurry look like not much at all. But here we're looking up Cherry at the corner of First or Front Street and Cherry. This, Paul, the building in the front is?
Yes, there's a pavilion, or it's hall, and I don't remember which it is.
Yesler's Hall,
Anybody
Yesler's
remember
Pavilion.
which name it is? Hall or pavilion? You, Clay, remember
I
that?
have to look it up in the book.
Good point. Clay did the editing of the article, so it's amazing to me that he doesn't remember these things. He was looking at it with fine tooth.
All right, so we're going to flip forward now, and you know, sometimes I just can't get there when the snow is falling. I actually went down to see if I, just as an experiment, in the middle of this last snow, to see if I could get First Avenue and Cherry, and it looked about like this, because so quickly do those city streets clear off, the downtown streets, and Cherry in particular is very rapidly cleared. But this was a couple years ago, in 2017, and I got a lot of flakes, and if you look closely, there is a little pile on top of it. So sometimes you get it.
It's one of my favorite pictures in the book.
Really, it's just that
Yeah,
snowfall.
the little snowflakes, yeah, big snowflakes.
One of the great
Can you hear us okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
One of the great photographers of Seattle history and around the turn of the last century was, or 2 centuries ago, I guess we have to say now, was Anders Vilse, who was a Norwegian who came out to photograph. He was, didn't he photograph for the railroads first, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And he ended up in Seattle for a number of years, not long, but in his Seattle career, he took some iconic and lovely photos. And this is one of them, looking from, his back is to Pike Street, looking along the waterfront. And already the photo that I took with my students last year is dated because, of course, you'll look at it today, and look what we're about to lose. So this is going to be, if we do a second edition in a couple of years, this is due for a repeat. So, but we have to wait till the park is put up.
Now is a relative
I don't-
proposition.
That's true.
I think he could do a second edition, that's fine, but I also think he should just do a new edition. That is not the same stories, but there's 1,800 of them. But there's
Yeah.
only 100 in this thing. So there are a whole bunch of other ones that.
We could just go on for a lifetime,
well,
as
my
one
lifetime,
has.
yeah.
This is another Anders Vilse photograph. Now he's, rather than looking south, he's looking north on the waterfront, and there's, you can't, this is actually a nice screen. It gets a lot of the details in here. We're looking north. This is 98, 99, in the 100-day period between the winter and spring of 98. More than 100 vessels left from Seattle port to go up to the Yukon. So this is right at the height of the gold rush. And I love this sign, portable aluminum houses, weight 150 pounds, just the thing for Alaska. So that wonderful Charlie Chaplin film with the guys go hiking up these slopes, a lot of them are carrying these enormous 150-pound aluminum houses on their shoulders to get up there. And as Paul's pointed out, they're probably making an ice box. So here's that same location today. We're right in front of Coleman Dock. The parking here has changed as well as they've opened up the street and prepared to take down the viaduct, which we've discovered is probably going to be finished if the waterfront merchants have their way before the end of before summer really gets into, so they're hoping for the end of May. We shall see.
All right, let's ask this crew here, West Seattle citizens, what their feelings are about, well, you have a choice in this question. Would you prefer that the viaduct could remain, or are you happier with the way things have developed, the way they are now? Okay, those of you who would prefer that the viaduct would have remained, raise your hands now. So, and those of you who would have preferred, that are in favor of it going as it did and is now, raise your hand.
Without the tolls.
What's that?
Yeah.
Without the tolls forever.
Without the tolls, yeah.
Without, no, you shouldn't have mentioned those. That's really confusing. The tolls aren't eternal after all,
They are.
Well, they could be.
They will be eternal. Yeah. Oh, yeah. This one we paid off in our lifetime.
That's eternal, isn't it?
Yeah.
Wait a second, we have
I like the 6-lane trench idea better.
You what?
I liked the 6-lane trench idea better.
The what?
6-lane trench.
Instead of the tunnel.
You know, it's interesting that that was shot down by everyone who had a business in that 1.5 miles, the Miracle Mile of the waterfront. They said, if you build a trench, we will close, all of us.
You can always put a lid on it later.
Well, they know that, but just that was their complaint. So everyone had their ball to roll uphill. This is Anders Vilse, celebrated in Norway, he went back to Norway, and in early 20th century ends up in Norway for 30 years or so, shot some of the most marvelous images of Norway and the villages and the countryside. And they released a whole set of stamps of his photos in 2015. And but he's a marvel. He really.
Did he take pictures of any other parts of the United States?
You know, it was, as far as I know, it was mostly Seattle.
Wow.
The railroads coming, documenting the arrival of the railroads through the mountains. And but I don't know of any other communities that he lived in and took photos of.
He might have, except for his wife. When he went back to Norway, he came back on the call of his wife, who informed him once he got there, is that he's not going back to Seattle. They're staying in Norway. And he obeyed her. She who must be obeyed. So he stayed.
Well, I understand that.
I think
What's that?
she can understand that. Yeah, well, yes, as do we all.
I think she was here with him in Seattle. I don't think I should learn that. It's funny. I know somebody who knows. I'm a little confused about that. But that's what she put her down, and then he obeyed.
So onward, we're looking now down from not the top floor of the Smith Tower, but about the 35th floor. Smith Tower is 42 stories. This is when it was a year before it opened to the public, and a photographer with the Webster and Stevens studio, Frank Noel, took the elevator up, got off, and shot through the girders. And this was the first time from this spot downtown that people could actually, they got to the 20th floor and they realized we can see Lake Union. So it was kind of a little vista opened up from this tower that remained the highest in Seattle until the Space Needle, and the highest west of Mississippi for decades. So here we can see Queen Anne. You can see up on the top, of course, here are our landmarks. West Seattle High School.
Queen Anne High School.
Queen Anne High School. Yeah, West Seattle High School. That's a panoramic photo. St. James, which still at this point, because it's 1913, still has its dome hiding behind the Twin Towers. And down here, the Rainier Club.
Is that First Methodist Church dome? That's right.
Yep.
Rainier?
Oh, wow.
Yes, it is. Right behind there, you can see the dome of First Methodist. So I did not go to the 35th floor. I did go a little higher, up to the observation deck. So I'm about 7 floors higher than this photographer. So let's take a look at it today and watch for Lake Union now.
So,
Gene, can you point out the Rainier Club?
should we do it again? Watch the Rainier Club. Remember where that was?
Yeah.
Okay, so the Rainier Club will be with us forever.
There it is, yeah.
And you can just see right there
Yeah.
the dome of the edge of the Methodist. And we're going to look at that lovely tower there. We're going to talk about that, in a few moments.
I love the trees.
I know.
You love the what?
The trees. We have good trees here. This is a year before they finished riveting the final girders up and opening the what we know as the Aurora Bridge. It's the Monongahela, which was built in Glasgow in 1882, and this is March, March of 31. And they're bringing out the last of the tall ships from Lake Union, because when they close those girders, there's nothing they can do to get the ship out except cut those masts down. So they took the Monongahela out where it had been just nesting, what would you call that, harboring, awaiting sail. They sold it to a Vancouver logging company, and then they took the mast down anyway and turned it into a log barge. So, but what a beautiful vessel. Well, I had to go back and find the equivalent, and I did find a sailboat, but you can barely see it. It's not the Monongahela, it's this guy right there.
Yeah.
Well, let me say something about this picture because it reflects on the entire book. This is a wonderful book for looking at historical photos, and of course, having the nows with an ends gives you a sense of continuity and changes. But the fact that Jean did these now shots with such rigor, he took so much time to them, waiting for the proper situation, that the book is a wonderful display of Seattle. You may call it the picturesque Seattle, except that also it has some things that are, they're not grand, but they are perfect for what they are. So that's why you should buy several copies. Because your relatives in Peoria, Illinois or something are going to want this book. All right.
I want to amend that.
I hope it's
You've
with a donut.
You've read Paul's Seattle Now and Then column for the past 37 years. Well, many of the nows that he shot are now thens, of course. And so for this book, all of the nows are updated. And they're in beautiful color.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, these have all been shot in the last couple of years. So for the most part,
Why
there's
would
one
you
or
have
two.
thought otherwise?
Yeah,
Because he shot him, see?
that's right. Well, I wasn't around it.
Yeah, but
I wasn't born until '83.
83.
Yeah. Okay, so this is a significant key. We're going from below the Aurora Bridge. We're going to go up to the top deck. But before we get there, I want to show you this key to our city. And it's a key called the Taft Key. It's in the Smithsonian now. There are 22 gold nuggets around the outside. And they're all from the Yukon. And they're from the fellow who actually discovered gold for the first time in the Yukon, George Carhart. And when he, in 1909, he created this telegraph key mounted on a block of Alaskan marble and festooned with these gold nuggets from his original claim. And he gave it to President Taft. And over the next 50-odd years, the 7 presidents used the Taft Key to open significant events around the country by hitting the key, and that was the sign. Well, Taft used it to open AYP, the Alaska Yukon Pacific, our first World Fair. And it was also used in the early 30s on this occasion. This, where we've gone up now to the deck of the Aurora Bridge, and it is actually the George Washington Memorial Bridge, named and opened on February 22nd, 200 years after the birth of George Washington.
Wow.
So on this day, all of these crowds were waiting on either side of the Aurora Bridge. And the governor at the time, Roland Hartley, had always been bitterly opposed to any interstate. He was an ag guy. He was from Everett. He really didn't want the great public works, and he was very strongly opposed to the idea of this bridge and Highway 99 and the works. And so when the day came, however, that Saturday, he stood in front of these enormous crowds, all waiting on either side, and proclaimed, and bloviated about this, took credit for the creation of the bridge, after having spent years hating it.
He was a Republican, but.
So, meanwhile, on the other side of the country, Herbert Hoover is waiting with his finger on the Taft Key. And as Hartley kept yammering on, and the crowds were yawning and getting more and more impatient, at 2:57 that afternoon, there's no communication between the two of them, it was just at that moment, Hoover pressed the button of the Taft Key. And trumpets sounded, and the flags unfurled, and a little fireboat down below sent up great flumes, interrupting Hartley's speech. The crowd streamed out onto the bridge, and he never finished.
All right.
So this is
This is my favorite photo of the book, by the way. You can kind of get an idea of where we got the idea for group hugs.
It's pretty wonderful. So here we go, and here we are today. This is an example of another, sometimes I just can't get to the right spot, so I have a 20-foot pole that I mount the camera on. And in this case, the closest I could get to the original photographer's elevation was on the hillside, but I'd be shooting through bushes and trees. And I'm always tempted to go out in the at midnight and make a few judicious cuts. But aside from that, I use my 21-foot pole to get up in the air and take a number of shots to match the elevation of the original.
We refer to it as Gene's big 21-footer.
Yeah. Some refer to it that way. And here's Herbert Hoover with the Taft Key at that moment, about to press it and interrupt our dear Governor Hartley. I don't know if he's smirking or... Well, again, it was 30 years later that the Taft Key was used by John F. Kennedy to open Seattle World's Fair. And here it is, and he's pressing it, and the moment he would press that button, all the fireworks would go off, or all the streamers would be released. Well, a column that we did in the paper, and this is a photo that was taken a few years back, because I love this picture. This is Paula Dahl, who on her second visit to the fair, and the fair lasted for 6 months, and in October, near the end of the fair, on her second visit, she was the 9 millionth visitor to the fair, and was suddenly made a VIP. And you can see the big dog that she received, her proud parents, and her very unhappy sister. She's now an Issaquah elementary school teacher, and she has that 9 million sign on her wall, so we had our kids come out and pose to retake this photo. The Seattle Fire, 1889. Paul, in his original column, suggests that the reason there's only a half dozen photos of the fire actually burning is because the photographers were rescuing their studios and their equipment and their negatives. They were grabbing them up and running out, because a lot of them had studios right in the. This is Front Street, First and Spring today, and so everything we're looking at burned down, and another 30 blocks besides. And it was one of those fortunate falls in the end, because we lost thousands of rats went to their death, but no humans. So we look at that same spot today, the 20-foot, 1-foot pole standing where an old window once stood.
How many of you felt some sympathy for the rats? Anybody raise your hand if you did. Did you? No
Not
one
really.
did, huh?
There's no PETA members here tonight, I guess.
Yeah, they,
We've got a lot of changes to do with society, and that's one of how we treat our pets and how we treat other animals. We're abominable at it. There's my sermon for tonight.
yep.
So this is this photo from the paper was, there were many hundreds of photos of the aftermath of the fire, many thousands. This is a marvel of within a couple days after the fire. You see the fellows who've been fighting the fire. You see you will recognize in just a moment this little, what do you call that, a cornice? It's actually the edge of a Flatiron building that was originally the Occidental Hotel, and after the fire on that same footprint, first of all, let's look at it today, and you can see right where that spot is. So that's the Pioneer Building here.
Oh, wow.
It's the front of the sinking ship garage.
Wow.
On that spot, on that triangle, once stood first the Occidental Hotel before the fire, and afterwards they built the Seattle Hotel, which lasted until almost 60, didn't it, Paul?
61.
And so let's take a look at this now, and we're going to see what the Seattle Hotel, look at that.
Cool.
This is from 1908. And it's another festival welcoming the Great White Fleet to town. And but 1908, and this gorgeous building stood for 60 plus years on that spot, and then was taken down and replaced by the sinking ship garage. Now, Paul is going to, there it is today.
How many of you know that name for it, the sinking ship garage? Raise your hands. It's popular, okay? But not with you.
So we're going to do we're going to zoom in a little bit, and Paul, I'm going to tilt this towards you, and you can describe, and I will use my finger to point at what you're talking
Well,
about.
fenestration, you know what that is, fenestration? It's the kind of windows that something has, yeah. So when the local preservationists complained about the loss of the hotel, the people who owned that, the property, they said, well, that's all right, we're going to put something there that is sympathetic with the hotel. We're going to give it architectural qualities that will retain them. For instance, the fenestration. And that was the windows, really. That was the top.
The basket handles there.
Yeah, basket handles, right. So they put these big loops,
Can you see at the top?
like the windows in the old hotel, up on top of them. And they felt kind of happy about that.
Oh, dear.
I think it shows a certain kind of arrogance and sensitivity.
Right, good point. They go together a lot.
So we're showing
Are we okay?
the market in 1907.
Look at that.
And the reason for that is
He's a
that
saint.
the loss of the Seattle Hotel inspired none other than a number of preservationists, but particularly Victor Steinberg, who then led the movement to save the market. Because of course, we were improving our city, and one of the things that had to go was the Pike Place Market in the 60s.
No.
So Victor went out there, and by hook and by crook, he organized thousands of Seattleites, and we managed to do it. And so he has a park named after him, rightly so, at the north end of the market. Let's look at it today. That was 1907, right at the beginning, and here we are today. What a beautiful place. I love the fact that everyone knows that they can walk right down the middle of the street and all the cars have to give way. And nobody complains because you're having a good time driving down, if you're driving or walking.
I wonder if they can guess where this is.
Followers of the column will know where this is because it was featured only a couple years ago. For those of you who, well, let's just have a guess. Where is this in downtown Seattle? Where could this be? Any guesses?
It's near Japantown on the
It's a look, good guess. It could be not too far from there. Well, there you go. Let's take a look at it today.
Stand up, sir, we want to salute you. We had a prize to give. We had a prize to give, we would give it to you, but you're not getting a book, you gotta buy one.
But I remembered it from the column. This photo was taken by Werner Lenkenhager, and he was an amateur photographer who documented a lot of places around Seattle, but in particular, he went up and down this alley not far from his house and took several photos looking on what would become, he knew, since it had already been platted, it would become I-5 going up and down. And in the book we show his north facing photo and his south facing. And the south facing shows the city hovering as well. Here we are at 3rd and Union, and this is another little loss, a building that stood for about 50 years.
Any of you remember that building on the right?
Post office.
That's the post office. Do you remember that post office?
Yes.
Wonderful.
Well, this was a
Would
post.
you like to stand up too, or? Okay. You two are not getting a free book.
This was a post office, and still a post office to this day, but it was built in 1908 and it lasted till 58 when it was torn down because these gorgeous sandstone steps, about which Seattleites would say, "Meet me at the steps," and everyone knew you meant meet me on the post office steps. And these wonderful sandstone pillars, columns, were subject to being stained by pigeon poop. So those, there was a fairly sturdy movement against this, but there were people who said, you know, we need a nice clean building that won't be harmed by pigeons and won't offend our sensibilities. So they replaced it with the box and steel, the glass and steel building, which is on the same spot, but you see there's no steps to meet on anymore.
No.
There's no pillars. Someone compared it to a filing cabinet that's been tipped on its side. And Paul will tell you that it's actually better today than it was when they first put it up, because at least they moderated it with some exterior facade work.
Now, Gene could take another picture of it and show that difference. Maybe he will. Where are we here, you guys? How many of you?
How many of you were in Hooverville?
How many of you lived there? How many of you lived there?
You know, we just passed this as we came out of the 99 tunnel. I just said, well, there's Hooverville, Paul. And this photo was taken in the mid-30s. It's about 250 of the 500 or so shacks that were on this dockland. And today, we went back, it was taken from the B.F. Goodrich building, a building that no longer exists. So
look at the Smith Tower as this train station.
Oh, wow.
So the waterfront is, the docks actually got me a lift truck and put me up about 40 feet. So I managed to get that shot.
Clay points out the Smith Tower. Don't you normally point that out?
Well, yeah, we can. It's see, once again, it's mid-30s and there's
it's
nothing
part of the
taller.
magic. You find a touchstone in the old photo that you can find in the new.
Yeah.
I have another tunnel question, okay? How many of you have taken the new tunnel? Okay, of you, how many of you took it simply to experiment with it? Okay, and you that experimented with it, can you see yourself using it? Will you pay? No?
It depends, Paul. It depends on if it's 45 minutes one way and 20 minutes the other, it might be worth the $2.
Yeah.
I-5 is too often a parking lot.
It is, yeah.
It's what?
Parking lot.
Too often a parking lot.
You've used it several times?
I-5 is too often a parking lot, she said.
Yeah,
You mean
so
the
I'm saying
tunnel?
The tunnel is a really good alternative. Yeah,
I'm confused.
Depending on the
Do you
tunnel.
like the tunnel or not?
I do.
And is it a parking lot?
No, I-5 is the parking lot.
I-5
I
becomes
see
a
your
parking
point.
lot,
Yeah,
making the
okay.
tunnel a good alternative.
Clay?
I think time will tell.
We will find out.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, this is Fremont, the corner of 34th and Fremont Avenue, and it's 1940, April. The motorman who ran this trolley he took the photos. Within a year, all the trolleys in Seattle were gone. Most of them downtown had disappeared. This was a Finney Ridge trolley that was still going up and down between Fremont and Finney Ridge. But a year later, it was all gas-powered buses and trackless trolleys. So we had to find something to replace this significant trolley, which is one of the last of its kind. And I went back on another day on that same corner, and this is what I found. To replace those trolley headlights, we found a couple of women walking abreast.
She's gonna be proud.
You wouldn't have got away with that 50 years ago.
No, that's true. It would have been rated. Here we are in King Street in Chinatown. This is the Go Hing Festival in the early 20s. And I went back to repeat this with the Seattle Kung Fu Society, which has been led since 1960 by John Liang. And you're going to see his crew, and you can see the lion dancers all outfitted for celebration, and the car with flowers and flags. And here is John and his crew stepping out into the middle of King Street. And we spent about 10-15 minutes setting up and getting the lions and the flags. And this guy is a West Seattle cop. So when I said, should I worry about being stopped? He said, no, I'm a cop. I'm from West Seattle. So one of your own saved the day.
Are they paid well?
I don't know. Not by Amazon standards.
I don't know either.
Yeah. Good answer.
Right?
Here we are, it's 1906. This is an excursion down the Black River. The river that with the opening of the Seattle locks disappeared. And all that's left of it now are little burblings and swampy bits. And so today, going back to this spot, we find this is Rainier Avenue near Renton, just on the way to Tukwila.
Isn't it in Renton?
Yeah, I guess it is in Renton proper. It's about a mile away from my birthplace, Paul. This is looking north, and there's Carl from the Brown Bear Car Wash.
Where were you born?
Giving us a sense of scale.
Pointed out.
This way, over towards the Copeland Lumber, now Copeland Lumber. It was Renton General Hospital.
Okay. Did you want to ask something?
Yeah, I comment that the name lived on and may still live on in railroad parlance because the Black River Tower existed for a long time. It was torn down, in the 80s maybe? And I think probably on railroad maps, the NSF and UP still refer to that intersection.
There's the Black River Tower.
Yeah.
Tower, you say?
It was a railroad control tower, yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's called Black River Junction.
Black River Junction, yeah.
Right.
That's right. I've got
And certainly-
quite a few pictures of that, actually.
For the Duwamish people, the Black River disappearing in 1916 meant that their tribal grounds were also taken away. So all these little villages along the Black River, it was sort of the final blow for the Duwamish, where they just were erased. And it's still a bit of a sore point, as you might imagine, for the Duwamish today. You had a question over there?
There is a Black River Industrial Park down there, closer to where it joins the Green River.
Well, you can see, again, little swampy bits, because it has kind of ducked underground, but no one's taken a boat down the Black River for quite a while. In the process of, before Lake Washington was lowered, Lake Union was pretty close to its current level, but if we look at these kids today, they were the kids who sold Paul's first Seattle Now and Then book. He put them on the cover. The Brown kids.
Very, very good to me, the Brown family. Yeah, it was a very popular cover, and I sold
This is Lake Union,
lots and lots of books.
looking to the
And
southeast.
you can do that too. You can help out with this book.
This is Lake Union, looking to the southeast. And to give you a sense of that, interestingly, that's not East Lake, that is West Lake. Because they paved everything up to that point. So we're looking at a city parking lot right now, far removed from Lake Union.
And your neighbors.
And my neighbors, these are my neighbor kids. And I took them out in 2011, remember the Mohai show? We shot this photo in 2011. I thought, I've got to do a shot of those girls today. So 6 years later, went back, and here they are. And terrifyingly, Tia goes to Roosevelt and she can drive. She just got in her first accident in the snow.
Well.
This last
Where?
snow.
Where?
She was trying to go up a hill and she just went down, down,
I've
down.
done that.
Graffiti has changed.
Yeah.
Do what?
Yeah.
What was that comment?
The graffiti is different.
I can't hear you.
The graffiti
Oh, the graffiti.
in the
yeah.
pictures changed.
Well,
The-
Dean was just making a point about graffiti on our drive over here. There was new graffiti at the north end of the Aurora Bridge, and he was mentioning that, isn't it swell how the markers, the graffiti artists frequently leave that new stuff alone. You know, they let the, sort of like a fellowship of artists. And I know that's true too, because I did a study of one group that did graffiti. But it's not always true.
Well, this is, and I heard by your groans that you recognized it, or moans of approbation, this is the Kalakala going through the locks. And it's 1948, you can see all along the top deck, you can see that it's just jam-packed with the heads in the windows, heads along the top deck. And pay attention now to the wheelhouse up here, because it's not a very, it looks like something alien and wonderful and inventive, but it's actually not very efficient as a wheelhouse. We'll come back to it in a second. I had to go back and capture the Kalakala, which was passing through the locks with another vessel. And let's just take a quick look at that now. How to find something that was at least the same size or larger, and I found the USS Turner Joy, which I only discovered after shooting this. I knew it was coming through for about a month. It had been being restored in Lake Union for 2 or 3 months. It's a Bremerton museum ship. So it was coming back through the locks and headed back out to Bremerton. And it was in 1964, it joined the USS Maddox in the Gulf of Tonkin. So this was one of the 2 destroyers that created certain fictions in the Gulf of Tonkin. Here it is off the coast of
How do they
Vietnam.
create fictions?
Well, they were shall we go into this now? Do you guys remember the Gulf of Tonkin?
Oh, yeah.
It was a
You were there.
No, I did not want
So
to be there.
The Gulf of Tonkin was actually 2 incidents. The first one, USS Destroyer Maddox was claimed to have been, and actually probably was, attacked by Vietnamese gunboats. The second one was the basis of the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, and that was the one that was fictional. So there was an attack that probably didn't happen with torpedoes, but is that enough, Paul? Do we
No,
do
that'll do, Gene.
Okay.
They can all go home.
All right. All right, so there's the wheelhouse.
Oh, my.
This is off of Salty's. You guys may have visited this. Clay took this photo a couple months ago, and that's one of the last remnants of the Kalakala, but the wheelhouse had a problem. You can look at it in Clay's photo looking back towards the skyline. And it was that you actually needed a cluster of folks, besides the captain and the skipper and whoever is steering the boat, you needed people to shout up directions from below, because the field of view was so limited by these portholes.
How many here took the Kalakala? There's people in the room who have. Do you remember how it sounded?
Want me to imitate it?
Vibrating. It was a wah 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 wah. It was just
Exactly what I was gonna say.
It was a singular experience to ride the Calaco, and its last run was in the summer of 1967.
I remember it rattling.
Okay, Clay, do it.
You did it.
Oh, you did? Do it again.
Did you miss it?
One more time.
She doesn't miss anything. It was a wah 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 wah.
Yeah, there you go. I love that sound.
I was a little high school kid going to a stage band festival in Bremerton in June of '67.
What was your instrument?
Trombone.
You played your trombone at my 65th birthday.
Baritone. We're going on to SeaTac right
Wait
now.
a second. It wasn't a trombone?
No, it was baritone, Paul.
Well, you're versatile.
Low blow.
Okay.
This is just post-war. We opened up SeaTac, and here's the celebration with about 30,000 people, a number of planes gathered, and we're looking down on it appropriately from on high, from the aerial view. Here's a lovely shot taken that same day of a celebratory flight going overhead. And I tried to go back and get about the same position. It was difficult, but I got on top of the parking garage and got the control tower in there with a flag. So, oh, here we come to something that has already disappeared. This section of the viaduct no longer exists. This is just before opening day, in early April of '53. And there's the Smith Tower, and there's downtown. But let's look at it a couple years ago. Now you note the red car and the red garb. So I'm also going to point out something, because this is now a lost section. You can't get there anymore. We just drove by it tonight, and I looked up and I went, wow, they've actually removed a whole chunk of this area right now, or are in the process of taking it down. Now this building, which we pointed out before, which is right next to the Methodist church, is kind of a marvel all on its own. And it was called, when they first were developing it, they called it the, what is it? It is called, it's the F5 building now. I think they called it the Mark.
Yeah, I think it's.
Yeah. So the developer Kevin Daniels went to ZGF Architects and said, I want a building that will reflect the grace, the style, the elegance of my favorite actress.
And the leg length.
Well, we'll see that in just a second. So let's take a look at this. First off, looking down, there's the Methodist. This is taken in the fall this year. There's the Methodist Dome. There's that lovely building. And look at these lines. I think of them almost like lightning, lightning strikes. So it's a building the three of us all enjoy walking past. And here's the actress that Daniels was trying to capture the spirit of. And this picture was sitting in the lobby as the workers were building the place.
Inspiration.
Now look at it again. Look at her lines. And look at those lines.
It's backwards myself.
The workers like that.
Very lovely.
So we're going to jump now to, here we are in West Seattle. We are looking down, this is a photo taken in the mid-20s by Asher Curtis from the bathhouse, looking at the bandstand. He's looking out across, what is this, west, pretty much due west, isn't it, Clay?
Yeah.
So they replaced the wood with concrete and rebuilt, and all the way down to the point, to give a little seawall. And we can look at it today, and we're going to hurry on through now. But there's your concrete seawall in that, and it's in the same, you still have the same curve going, the same cut. And here's something that Clay was a part of, and also a prominent West Seattleite right here. You guys may recognize young Greg, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, wow.
There's Sharon Nichols off to the side, and there's their young boy. This is '89.
Yes, it was almost exactly 30 years ago, and then over on the far right is Georgette Valley, one of our former representatives. We organized this picket in 3 days after learning of the theater closing. Mo Bierman created these signs, you know, keep the ship afloat. And it's a perfect movie on the marquee for the last night.
So years later, when the Admiral was not only saved but you know, realized its all of those early intentions, we went back and did one of Clay's group hug photos. Well, let's get
That's
there.
opening night in '42.
Opening of the Admiral, yep. This is a Pritica theater, isn't it?
Yes, B. Marcus Pritica.
So let's look at it today in one of the group hugs.
This was to celebrate the reopening, or not reopening, but the renovation into 4 screens of the theater without harming any of the historic features inside. And this is 3 elementary school groups of students who walked to this. There are 850 kids in this. And Jean's artistry in putting this together really makes it look like a hug.
Okay, we're going to flip right through this and head for the end. We're almost to the end, Paul. We're very close now.
I'm having a good time.
Okay. This, I'm guessing many of you know as the oldest structure in Seattle extant. This is it. And it is from the early 1860s. Doc Maynard built it in your fair section of this city. The folks sitting on, this is a photograph taken in the 90s. The folks sitting down here and squatting here and standing here are the Hanson family. And the gal in the white skirt, the white dress, is Ivar's mother. So it was their family that bought this house, and now they're posing in front of it. This is Snidely Hanson. And some boy was peeing on the corner, we don't know who. This is mother and father, Ivar's grandparents, and his mom. And who do you think the young girl is? Do we have any idea who that girl is?
I do on a piece of paper in my notes.
Okay.
I've forgotten. It's one of the sisters. There were several sisters.
So here we are today, and actually this is members of the Southwest Seattle Historical Society joined us a couple summers ago to take this photo. And since I took that photo, interestingly, the current owners have trimmed back this mighty bush and repainted the front of this house, so it's actually more attractive now and worth a visit. There's no sign indicating that it is Maynard's and the oldest house and the oldest structure in Seattle. So if you want to go there, go out towards the Statue of Liberty and go up 64th, and you walk about 10 houses in, and it's
The address is in the book.
The address is in the book.
Do you mean to say that the pruning and the painting were done by the residents because you were there?
No. It was just that I came back.
It was purchased by a new owner who fixed it up.
Who spiffed it up and turned it from a kind of a shabby exterior to something quite lovely. So
Could you back up and look at it again?
yeah.
That looks shabby to me.
Well, it wasn't.
It's better.
It's better today. It's
You can almost improve, can't you?
they repainted it. It's no longer beige. You know, which is always a disappointment. Paul prefers the beige.
No, that's not.
So here we are. We're on our last subject here, and this is Princess Angeline. And we mentioned Doc Maynard's house. Well, it was Catherine Maynard who gave Princess Angeline, nicknamed her Princess Angeline. Her actual name was Kiki Soblu. She was the daughter of Chief Seattle. And a little more than a year ago, Ron Edge, our contributor and associate in the column, and Paul really spent some time and figured out just where this shack was, this little house. It's below Western, and through a process of triangulation and looking at roof lines and logs and stumps and comparing everything, they figured out just where this spot was. And it's been a mystery for most of that 100 years. So we went back and reshot it with Ron in that same spot, and there it is. He's sitting pretty much on the porch. This is the Pike Street parking garage, Pike Market parking garage, and that's the Fix Medor building on the right. And there's a little green belt filled with bamboo, which if you're looking down from Lowell's in the market, you can kind of see it right down below you. So it's this kind of, it's still open air, which is what made me happy, was to know that you could still, and I have pictures looking from where Ron is down towards the waterfront. And there's the viaduct in the way when we were taking this, but soon.
Ron is looking towards the bay.
He's looking towards the west.
The other picture, people are looking south.
If you want to see this, go eat at Lowell's. Go to the second floor and look straight out the window. It's there.
You know the menu?
Yeah.
Burgers.
What do you suggest they get?
Seafood.
So our last comparison is Princess Angeline here in the early 1890s, sitting as she often did, squatting for a portrait, and she is right at the corner, just below the corner of First and Pike. And we inset a picture of her dad for a very particular reason. And I'll demonstrate. So some of you may know Ken Workman, who's the great-great-great-great-grandson of Chief Seattle through his second wife. And to his right is Mary Lou Slaughter, who created a remarkable basket weaver. If you've ever been down to the Duwamish Lodge, you've seen the Longhouse. You've seen the design on the floor is based on her basket work.
Wow.
So she donated her design to be replicated in the parquetry of the floor of the Longhouse, and it's glorious down there. So
What's that word?
Parquetry, marquetry. When you take little pieces of wood and arrange them. So Mary Lou is the great-great-great-great-granddaughter of Princess Angeline. So we had the two of them side by side, about the same location that the original one was taken.
I think we have an objection here. Go ahead.
No objection. Back to the location where Chief Seattle's daughter's house was. You said it's an open air space now?
Yeah.
Is that going to remain open air?
It's been that way since she was there. It's so slim that there's really no, I don't know of any plans, and it's so steep too. You've got an old condominium which is on one side, the Fix Medor building, and then you've got the parking garage on the other. And I suppose someone could try to slide something in there, but it would be pretty difficult. Right now they have bamboo that runs all the way up, and the bamboo is harvested and used by the Pike Place Market for various structures in the market.
So if someone wanted to develop on that, I'm sure there would be some eyebrows raised.
Yep. We don't know.
But people didn't know this. There's been a general sense, for as long as I can remember, which is about 40 years, that the cabin, her house, was somewhere near there, somewhere between Pike and Pine, and somewhere between Western and the Bay. That was the general sense. But to get it located as well as this has been located, required to have a Boeing, Smarty come and help.
So while we were taking this photo, Clay was taking the photo. And while we took the photo, afterwards, Clay and Ken and Mary Lou and I went down to Ivar's for a little happy hour snack. And Ken said, it was so strange. I thought the people were trying to push past me. And I was really impatient for you to shoot that picture, Gene, because I thought people were trying to push past me. And Clay and I said, well, there was nobody behind you that we could see. And he said, so, well, someone halfway through the shoot here, someone was tapping me on the elbow. And I think of this as, and I love that story, and it's the one we used to finish the show. I think of the tap of history, whether it's from the spirit world or whether it's Ashel Curtis' photograph, sort of finding that spot where he stood and
It's still the spirit world, Gene.
Is that the spirit world? Well, I'm looking at his photo. I'm not looking at Ashel himself.
Well, I think Gene's got two sides to him. One is the skeptic, the other is the theater. He's got theater in it. He's now leaning on the theater side.
Anyway, so
you get him out of this building and start cross-examining him, and he'll move.
Ask Ken about this moment, because he's actually been telling this story as a kind of a lovely little.
It's a good story.
Story of connection and historical throughput.
I think we all feel that at some point when we're standing someplace where we know something happened before.
Yeah. Well, that's it. That's the book.
Oh, thank
Here's Paul on the back cover. And I think we might just have enough time to sell a couple copies. We have, I have a wonderful device here which accepts credit cards and et cetera. So
Give us a minute or so to set up here, and then come on up. The books are total of $55. Cash, check, card, whatever you wish.
And what is $55 today?
That includes the sales tax.